Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. Today we will recite Surah Al-Araf. Surah Al-Araf is a very lengthy surah. It consists of 206 verses. It is a Makki surah. Some people have said that there are some verses, 163 to 170, that were revealed in Medina, but others are of the opinion that the entire surah was revealed before Hijrah. The surah was revealed after Surah Sade, which is in the 24th juz. That's in terms of the sequence of revelation. And in terms of the sequence of compilation, it is the 7th surah in the Quran. This surah focuses on primarily on lessons that are derived from the nations before us and people before us. The beginning part is devoted to Tawheed and Akhirah. So, the surah opens with mention of the Quran, that this is a book that has been revealed to you. Let there not be in your heart any hesitation from following it, from conveying it, and from using it to warn people and remind people. Follow this book, follow what has been revealed to you from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and don't follow what people are saying. Then, verses 4 to 7, generally speaking, that there are many nations that we have destroyed because of their own mistakes, and the punishment often came at a time when they were least expecting it. Bayatan aw hum qa'ilun. Sometimes it came in the middle of the night, and sometimes it came in the middle of the afternoon when everyone was resting. They were in their homes taking their siestas, their naps, and all of a sudden the adab of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala came. In some cases it came in the middle of the night. In other words, the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can come without warning, and it can come when people least expect it. And here, فَلَنَسْأَلَنَّ الَّذِينَ أُرْسِلَ إِلَيْهِمْ, Allah says, I'm going to ask those who were warned and the prophets were sent to, وَلَنَسْأَلَنَّ الْمُرْسَلِينَ, and I'm going to ask the prophets themselves. So the nations that the prophets were sent to, they're going to be asked, they're going to be questioned, and the prophets who were sent to them will also be questioned. The nations will be asked about how they responded to the prophets. The prophets will be asked about how the nations responded to them, and to what extent and capacity they conveyed the message Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had bestowed upon them. Verses 8 to 10 talk about Akhirah, that on the day of judgment the deeds are going to be weighed. وَالْوَزْنُ يَوْمَئِذٍ الْحَقِّ. Now, we read in ahadith and also in some verses of the Quran that there are some people that are going to enter into Jannah without any hisab. And we also read in the Quran about some people that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala لَا نُقِيمُ لَهُمْ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ وَزْنًا. There's not going to be any mizan set for them. So then what does it mean? Is there going to be a mizan for everyone, or is there not going to be a mizan? So the fact is that the mizan is going to be set. وَنَضَعُ الْمَوَازِينَ الْقِسْطَ لِيَوْمِ الْقِيَامَةِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to fix these balances, these scales of deeds. But there will be two groups of people that will not need to have their deeds weighed. There are some people that, because of their virtue and because of their deeds, they were so close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they did certain things by which they excelled in the sight of Allah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will exempt them, grant them an exemption from that whole process of having their deeds weighed. Like it is mentioned about the people of Sabr, people who went through a great deal of problems in this world. So the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ says that the people who won their merit by virtue of good deeds, they will have to go through this process of having their deeds weighed and the whole accounting. But then these people of Sabr will be brought. The people who all they have in their account basically is the hardships that they endured. Now everyone knows that enduring a hardship, going through a problem, is much more difficult than praying salat. It is much more difficult. You're enduring a musibah. But these people endured it with the qualities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted. So the hadith says, فَلَا يُنصَبُ لَهُمْ دِيوان وَلَا يُنصَبُ لَهُمْ مِيزان. No book will have to be opened, and no scales will have to be set for them. فَيُصَبُّ عَلَيْهِمُ الْأَجْرُ صَبًّا. And reward will just be poured over them without any hisab. حَتَّى أَنَّ أَهْلَ الْعَافِيَةِ. Those people that also did good deeds, but they lived a life of ease and comfort. يَتَمَنَّوْنَ أَنَّ أَجْسَادَهُمْ قُرِضَتْ بِالْمَقَارِيضِ. They will wish that their bodies had been cut into pieces with scissors, and they had endured that pain and been patient, so they could also have the reward that these people are getting today. So there are some people who will be exempt by merit of extremely, extremely good deeds, great hardships that they have endured. And there are some people that because of their shirk, their deeds will not need to be weighed. They will be thrown directly into Jahannam. But for the rest of mankind, yes, there's going to be a mizan, and deeds are not going to be counted, they're going to be weighed. And I mentioned this concept in a little bit of detail because this surah is called Surah Al-Araf. Araf is the name of a place between Jannah and Jahannam. And it is for those people whose good deeds were not enough to get them into Jannah, and their bad deeds were not enough to drag them into Jahannam. They were kind of stuck in between. They're waiting there for some sort of decision to be made. So these are people obviously who've gone through that concept of the mizan. In any case, from verse 11 onwards is the story of Adam alayhi salam and Iblis. How Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created him, shaped him, had the angels prostrate to him. Iblis refused, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala questioned him about it, and he said, I'm better than him, that's why I didn't bow to him. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had him rejected, and he said, give me respite, give me some time. Allah said, you have time. So he said, now, because you have led me astray, or you have allowed me to go astray, now I'm going to sit waiting for them on your straight path. لَأَقْوَدَنَّ لَهُمْ صِرَاطَكَ الْمُسْتَقِيمِ. So where does shaitan wait for people? He waits for people on the straight path. Those that are already on the wrong path, shaitan doesn't have to work too much on them. Their desires are enough to keep them going, to keep them motivated towards bad. Their own evil tendencies or wrong tendencies are enough to keep them moving in that direction. But those that are walking on the straight path, that is where shaitan waits. And he launches these subtle, very quiet but destructive attacks on the iman of a person, on the character of a person, on the intention of a person, in different ways where he knows how to tackle people. He will bring certain things, certain diseases into them. So for someone, he'll bring the disease of arrogance. Another person, he'll bring the disease of jealousy. Another person, he'll bring the disease of hatred for others, or enmity for others, or anger, or this or that. And he will use these things to pin the person down. And he says, I'm going to come to them from every angle. From in front of them, from behind them, from their right side, from their left side. And you will see, oh Allah, I'm going to prove to you that most of these people are not grateful for your bounties. Anyways, he was rejected and banished. Adam alayhi salam and his wife Hawa were allowed to reside in Jannah, and they were allowed to eat from wherever they wanted except for one tree. So there's a long story behind it, but shaitan managed to put in their heart that this tree, you have only been warned not because there's something wrong about it. There's nothing wrong with eating this tree. That prohibition was not something for tahrim. It was not because eating from this tree is haram or its fruit is haram. It is because إِلَّا أَن تَكُونَ مَلَكَيْنِ أَوْ تَكُونَ مِنَ الْخَالِدِينَ. Because if you did, then you would become angels, or then you would live forever. Or you are only allowed to eat this if you are an angel, or if you have been given a perpetual life. So he caused a confusion in their minds. And he kept telling them there's nothing wrong with it, there's nothing wrong with it, there's no sin in this, there's no mistake in this. Go ahead and do it. That prohibition was just as a piece of advice that it's better if you don't, but if you do, it's okay. Like people today, they ask, no, tell me if it's haram or not. I need to know if it's haram. If you say, no, you should not do this, it's prohibited. No, I want to know if it's haram or not. In other words, as long as it's not haram, I'm going to do it. Even if it's something that is disliked, even if it's makruh, tanzihi, tahrimi, doesn't matter. But if it's not haram, I'm going to do it. But this person doesn't know that that thing could very much be haram, or it could be a doorway to haram. Anyways, Shaitan kept swearing, taking many oaths. Inni lakuma lamina nasihin. I am your well-wisher. I care about you. I don't have any interest. I have nothing to gain from you. I don't want anything from you. I'm just giving you a piece of advice for your own good. Anyways, they tasted it. And the first thing that happened is that their clothes of Jannah were stripped from them. So they started taking the leaves of Jannah and covering their private parts, which is a natural tendency. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has instilled modesty in the human being, and the lowest degree of modesty is that their private parts should be covered. So they were embarrassed and trying to cover themselves, and they started making tawbah and istighfar to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Oh Allah, we have wronged ourselves, and they asked for Allah's mercy. In any case, they were sent down to the world. Now you have to live in the world. You can no longer reside in Jannah. There you will live, there you will die, and from there you will be raised. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us some lessons. The first lesson is that Allah has given us libas. Libasa yuwari sawatikum warisha. This libas, clothing, it serves two major purposes. One is that it covers your bodies. It covers your private parts, and it covers the blemishes and flaws of your body. So through clothing, the blemishes of a person or those parts of a body that are unattractive, they are covered. The second thing is, clothing is a source of beauty and adornment. It is something that is appealing to the eye. So this is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to us. In other words, this is something you must maintain. Maintain your clothing. So the beauty of a person is in covering their body, not in exposing their body. These bodies are to be covered and only exposed at the time of necessity. And then there's the whole concept of awra and haya and hijab and dress code in Islam. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلِبَاسُ التَّقْوَى ذَلِكَ خَيْرٌ. Then there's another type of covering that a person takes, and that is the covering of taqwa, where a person completely covers himself in piety. So what is libas of taqwa? It could be the adorning oneself with those acts and those akhlaq that are liked by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and abstaining from all of those things that are disliked. Or libas of taqwa is that does not just cover the private parts, the bare minimum, but it is a libas of decency. It is a libas in which piety becomes apparent, that this is a person who is God-fearing. So the libas of taqwa, people ask about what is acceptable, what is unacceptable for clothing. The simple answer is libas of taqwa dhalika khair. The libas of taqwa is the best. What is the clothing adopted by the God-fearing people? That is the best clothing. The clothing that is adopted by the pious people in any culture. That is the best clothing for a person. A warning that don't let shaitan mislead you like he did with your parents, Adam and Hawa alayhim as-salam, and how shayateen become the friends of those whose faith is weak, whose iman is weak. Inna ja'alna shayateen awliya lilladhina la yu'minun. Then what happens when their iman is weak? Then they will justify their bad deeds. When a person has iman and they slip, they make a mistake, right away they will admit their mistake and try to rectify it. When iman is weak or absent, a person will make a mistake and they will try to justify it. So for example, if they do an act of indecency, if for example they dress indecently, they speak indecently, they act indecently, إِذَا فَعَلُوا فَاحِشَةً قَالُوا وَجَدْنَا عَلَيْهَا آبَاءَنَا. They'll have a justification. Oh, no, other people before us used to do this. Our parents were better than us and they used to do this, so we can do it as well. So they have justifications ready. It is a sign of extremely weak faith that a person commits a sin and has a reasoning behind it. There is no reason for a sin. There is nothing but admission of one's own mistake, that I have made a mistake, I need to correct it. And sometimes they say, Wallahu amarana biha. Allah has allowed us to do this, or Allah has instructed us to do this. They'll come up with some kind of, and this is a common thing today. I hear it very frequently. No, hasn't Allah said this as well? Allah has said this as well. If you're talking about things, Allah has said this also. Where did Allah say it? We should be very, very careful before we attribute something, ascribe something to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah has said or Allah has not said. خُذُوا زِينَتَكُمْ عِنْدَ كُلِّ masjid. Verse 31. Take your beauty, take your adornment at the time of every masjid. The time of every masjid meaning at the time of every salah. So خُذُوا زِينَتَكُمْ means cover yourselves properly. So what is the zina? The zina is that which the Prophet ﷺ used to adopt before performing salah. So dressing properly. The people of Quraysh in Jahiliyyah, they used to perform tawaf of Baytullah naked. They used to say that how can we present ourselves to Allah in clothing that we have committed sins in? This was their reasoning behind it. This was the logic behind it. How can we perform tawaf of His house in clothes that we have committed sins in? So they used to shed their clothes, and they used to come with this mode of piety, that I am doing this as an act of piety. So from this we learn a very important lesson. Merely the intention of piety is not enough. Just to intend to do something good is not enough. That thing must be good within and of itself also. People say, no, Allah knows my intention. This was my intention. This is my, now to them, that was their way of showing devotion to Allah. That was their way of showing love to Allah. That was their way of showing regret for their mistakes to Allah. But the way was wrong. So intention by itself does not suffice. Today people engage in all kinds of acts, bid'at, innovations, and they justify by saying, no, this is how I express my love. This is how I express my devotion. This is how I want it. Allah knows the condition of, Allah knows why I did it. It's not enough. The reason behind it is not enough. It is a part of the picture, but the next part is that is the act itself good or not? So men and women to perform tawaf without any clothes. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, take your beauty, take your adornment. What is the adornment? Again, it's clothing. So it tells us that the beauty of a person is when they are covered, not when they are uncovered. Even though modern society leads us to believe that the beauty of a person is when they're uncovered. The more of them is uncovered, the more beautiful and appealing and attractive they are. Allah says, no, the more covered you are, the more haya is apparent from you, the more modesty is apparent from you, the more beautiful you are. And this beauty is such that no one can make it haram. Who can make such a beauty haram? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has produced for His slaves. And who can make those things haram that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made halal for us? And then there's a mention of what has Allah made haram. Allah has made indecency haram. So these people used to go into this tawaf without clothes, thinking that it's an act of piety, but no, it's an act of indecency. And they used to say, no, it's not permissible for us. It's haram for us to wear clothes in this state. No, what is haram? Indecency is haram. Ma dhahara minha wa ma batan. That which is obvious and that which is hidden. So acts of indecency and thoughts of indecency, both are haram. It could be that your thoughts are not of indecency, but the act is indecent. So it's wrong. Or the act is decent, but the thoughts are indecent. That's also wrong. And Allah instructs us, another place in the Quran, وَذَرُوا ظَاهِرَ الْإِثْمِ وَبَاطِنَهُ. Leave every aspect of sin, the apparent aspect and the inner aspect of sin. Then some warnings again about following the prophets, taking what they're saying from verse 35 onwards. And again, do not attribute anything falsely to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That person is the greatest wrongdoer. And on the Day of Judgment, of course, people who did wrong and people who ascribe partners to Allah, they will be called and they will be asked, all right, where are those things that you used to call on? Those idols, those statues, whatever they were. They say, no, they're lost. They're not with us anymore. So then these people will inadvertently have to enter into Jahannam. Now, when a person is going to be put in that position, they're going to look at who caused this, who made this happen, who led me down this path. So they will blame those people that misguided them, their religious leadership, or their family members or forefathers, or their friends who influenced them. Anyone who had any influence over them in that direction, they will say, oh Allah, these are the people who caused us to be in Jahannam today. هَؤُلَاءِ أَضَلُّونَ فَآتِهِمْ ضِعْفًا مِنَ النَّارِ. Oh Allah, it's not fair, it would not be fair if they get the same punishment as us. They should get double the punishment. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reply, لِكُلٍّ ضِعْفٌ. Everyone is going to get double punishment. And then some of the descriptions of that punishment are mentioned. On the other side, people who had belief, did good deeds. And in good deeds, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives a statement, وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ لَا نُكَلِّفُ نَفْسًا إِلَّا وُسْعَهَا. They do good deeds, and remember, we only give people the burden that they can withstand. They are the people of Jannah, and they will remain there forever. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not asking us to do something that's out of our capacity. And one of the beautiful things of Jannah is that there's not going to be any ill feelings towards anyone. وَنَزَعْنَا مَا فِي صُدُورِهِم مِّن غِلٍّ. Before they enter into Jannah, one hadith mentions, a hadith of Bukhari and Musnad Ahmad and others, they mention that after these people cross the Sirat, and before they enter into Jannah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to allow qisas to happen. Yani if anyone has wronged anyone, these are people that are all going into Jannah, but they have wronged someone. So that exchange is going to take place, retribution will take place. So they will enter into Jannah with clean hearts. They're not going to have any ill feelings, anything in their hearts about what happened before this. Someone swore at me, someone hit me, someone took something of mine, someone wronged me, someone mistreated me. And in Jannah, there's going to be complete ease of mind and clarity of the hearts and love for one another. Then the people of Jannah will ask the people of Jahannam that, look, there were promises of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We followed that set of promises that was connected to Iman and good deeds. And you followed that set of promises that was connected with disbelief. So we found all Allah's promises for us to be true. Did you find all the promises for Allah for you to be true? And they will say yes. And then angels will call out, La'natullahi ala al-zalimin. The curse of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is on those who did wrong. Meaning they knew that the promises of Allah are going to be true, but they still continued down that path. وَبَيْنَهُمَا حِجَابٌ. Now this conversation is going to be taking place, but there's going to be some kind of a barrier. And the barrier is going to be such that they can see one another, they can hear one another, but the effects of one place are not going to reach the other. The effects of Jannah are not going to carry over to the people of Jahannam, and the effects of Jahannam are not going to reach over to Jannah. And there it is at this barrier, the place called Al-Araf. وَعَلَى الْأَعْرَافِ رِجَالٌ يَعْرِفُونَ كُلًّا بِسِيمَاهُمْ. And at this middle place are going to be people who know people from both sides. They have some friends in Jannah and they have some friends in Jahannam. They will call towards the people of Jannah and say Salam to them, but they will not be allowed to enter it even though they desire. And then they will look towards the people that they knew that are in Jahannam, and they will just make dua. They will not say Salam to them. They will say, رَبَّنَا لَا تَجْعَلْنَا مَعَ الْقَوْمِ الظَّالِمِينَ. Oh Allah, don't bring us into that group. Don't allow us to go on that side. Then they will ask them. They will ask their friends, the people that they used to know in dunya, who have ended up in Jahannam, that مَا أَغْنَى عَنْكُمْ جَمْعُكُمْ وَمَا كُنْتُمْ تَسْتَكْبِرُونَ. In the world, you had a lot of numbers. You had a lot of influence, a lot of power, and everyone used to listen to you, everyone used to admire you, but all of those numbers, all of that, that hype, it didn't help you. And in the world, you were very arrogant, very proud, very haughty. Your haughtiness didn't help you either. Like, you used to think that you are the ones who call the shots in this world. But none of that helped you today. And these people that you used to say that Allah has no mercy on them, look at them, they're in dire conditions, they don't have wealth, they don't have respect, they don't have this and this and this, and you used to ridicule them. Today they were the ones who were told to enter into Jannah without any fear, without any worry. So the people of Jahannam will of course realize this is going to increase their remorse and regret and depression. And so they will turn towards the people of Jannah and call out to them, Afidu alina min al-ma. There is no water here for us. Can you please send down some water from your Jannah to us? Aw mimma razaqakumullah, or anything that Allah has given you. Some kind of a food, something. So the people of Jannah will reply, Inna Allah harramahuma ala al-kafirin. Allah has made these things haram for you forever. That worldly life was where you got to eat and drink and enjoy yourselves. وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا يَتَمَتَّعُونَ وَيَأْكُلُونَ كَمَا تَأْكُلُ الْأَنْعَامُ وَالنَّارُ مَثْوًى لَهُمْ. They used to eat and drink and enjoy this world, but their enjoyment was similar to that of cattle who are fed and given drink, but not so that they can have wonderful lives and wonderful futures, only so that they can be fattened and then slaughtered and fed to people. Verses 54 to 56, in fact up to 58, talk about the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the importance of calling upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ud'u rabbakum tadarru'an wa khufya. How should we call upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? In a pleading manner. Tadarru'an is begging, pleading, showing your dire need, showing that you are nothing without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Belittling yourself or humbling yourself in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wa khufya, and secretly. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala likes to be called on secretly in the dark hours of the night, in the time when no one is listening, when no one is around. In those hours, those moments, seek nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لا تفسدوا في الأرض بعد إصلاحها. Once a system has been placed in the world, don't go and wreck it, don't go and ruin it. After this is a sequence of stories which take up most of the rest of the surah. This is from ayat 59 onwards. The first is the story of Nuh alayhi salam. He goes, warns his people, they reject him, and they say, you are lost. Inna lanaraka fi dalalin mubin. You are clearly lost, and lost meaning you have no idea what you're doing. You have no idea what you're saying. He said, no, I am not lost. Laysa bi dalala. There is no sign of being lost around me. I am a prophet of Allah. So this is how the prophets were mistreated. And then he reminded them, and the time came when 950 years later, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him to build that ark, and he boarded that ark, and those that believed with him were saved, and the rest were destroyed. The next story is that of the nation of Ad. And the Prophet Hud alayhi salam was sent to them. He also warned them, reminded them, shunned shirk, told them to get away from shirk and get away from all of these wrong things. But they did not listen. Instead, they mocked him and they challenged him. They said, if what you're saying is true, if that punishment that you're warning us about is true, then bring it. Why don't you bring it? So he said, look, you are incurring the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon yourselves. And what is this fight all about? What is this argument about? Atujadiluni fi asma, names, sammaytumuha, that you have made up. Antum wa aba'ukum, you and your forefathers. Ma nazzalallahu biha min sultan. In other words, what are these idols and statues and gods that you call on? What are they? They're nothing but names. There's no existence to them. They don't exist. And that's what you're fighting with me about? I'm inviting you towards Allah, one Allah, and you are fighting with me on the basis of these names, these make-believe names? Anyways, they did not listen. A small group followed Hud alayhi salam. They were saved, and the rest were destroyed. The next story is that of the nation of Thamud, and akhahum Salih, their brother Salih was sent to them. In other words, he was one of the people of Thamud, just like Hud alayhi salam was one of the members of that tribe or that nation of Ad. The nation of Ad was very widespread. Some historians mention that these people they used to dwell from somewhere down in Yemen all the way up to Jordan. And they covered a vast part of the world, that part of the world. The nation of Saleh alayhi salam, the people of Thamud, they also covered a pretty wide area of land. This land started in the south from Mada'in Saleh. It is also called Hijr in the Quran. The Mada'in Saleh is about 400 kilometers northwest of Medina Munawwara. It falls in today's Saudi Arabia. And it extended, the lands of Thamud extended all the way up into southern Jordan, where the city of Petra is. So quite a vast area, a region. So Saleh alayhi salam comes to them and he tells them to believe in one God, follow one Allah, and forget about all of these, these idols. And each of these prophets reminded them of Allah's bounties. Hud alayhi salam, reminded them of Allah's bounties. How after destroying Nuh alayhi salam's nation, how Allah SWT had favored Ad and how they were everywhere. And after them, here Saleh alayhi salam is reminding them of, look at the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed upon you. After Ad was destroyed, it is you people that are ruling this whole part of the world. And look what Allah has given you. He's given you these abilities to build and construct. And these people could, وَكَانُوا يَنْحَتُونَ مِنَ الْجِبَالِ بُيُوتًا آمِنِينَ. They would very easily be able to carve homes and entire structures out of mountains. They would take a mountain and carve it up. And the remains of these structures exist even today. So if someone were to go to Mada'in Saleh or go to Petra, for example, they would see that these homes and these structures that they have carved. So reminding them of Allah's favors, but they did not listen. They continued to hurt him, to insult him. As we will see in other parts of the Quran, they demanded a miracle, and the details of that miracle is that there was a she-camel that they wanted, that asked Allah to produce a camel from this mountain. So Allah SWT gave them a camel. That camel was pregnant. It gave birth to a child, and they mistreated that camel and they killed it. They killed that camel. And then the adab of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala came. What was that adab? For Nuh alayhi salam, the adab was the flood. For the nation of Ad, the adab was a wind that came, a storm that came and destroyed them. For the nation of Thamud, there were two punishments that are mentioned in the Quran. One is that of a scream, and the other is that of an earthquake. So an angel came and screamed, and their hearts burst, and the ground started shaking, and this earthquake caused all of them to die. فَأَخَذَتْهُمُ الرَّجْفَةُ. Here the quake is mentioned. فَأَصْبَحُوا فِي دَارِهِمْ جَاثِمِينَ. The next story is that of Lut alayhi salam. And Lut alayhi salam was the nephew of Ibrahim alayhi salam. He had migrated with him from Iraq and settled close by him in that area of Sham. So his people had engaged in wrong activities, where they were trying to, where the men were trying to fulfill their desires with other men. And Lut alayhi salam warned them. He shunned this activity, and they said, we need to expel Lut and his people from here. Anyways, the story is mentioned in more detail in other parts of the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saved him and his family except for his wife. The instruction was, no one should turn around. You must leave in the middle of the night and no one turns back. But his wife turned back to look at what's happening. And different kinds of punishment came upon the nation of Lut alayhi salam that are mentioned in the Quran. One is the rain of stones, and the other is the earthquake, and the third is their whole area being taken and turned upside down. The angels came, they picked it up, took it up to the heavens, and then smashed it back down. And today in that area is the Dead Sea, where nothing lives. No animal life can survive. No one can drink that water. In fact, fishes that manage to get drained in through some streams or another, those that manage to get into, they die immediately upon contact because of the immense salt content. Khair, these are signs. Now the Prophet ﷺ passed by the Mada'in of Saleh, and he covered his head, and he said, لا تدخلوا مساكن الذين ظلموا أنفسهم إلا أن تكونوا باكين. Don't go by the areas where Allah's adab has descended. The people that have wronged themselves, don't pass by those areas unless you are crying. and he quickly passed through there. So these are not places to go for sightseeing and enjoyment. If a person happens to be in such an area, he should pass by very quickly and only go by there with the intention of taking an ibarah, taking a lesson, and not going as tourists and enjoying that. Today people are trying to build resorts around these places. Next is the story of Madian. Now Madian is the actual name Madian. Madian was one of the sons of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And the town of Madian, it falls into southern Jordan today. In fact, if you are going from Amman going south, the town of Madian comes on your left side. So Shu'aib alayhi salam, who was also from that area, he was sent to them. He invited them towards Tawheed. And there were certain problems in that society that he worked on rectifying. For example, one was shirk. The second was that their system of commerce was very, very corrupt. When they were buying and selling, when it came time to take a payment, they would always take more than they were supposed to take. When it came time to give something, they would always give less than they were supposed to give. And their whole system was running on. Imagine you have a whole system of trade that's based on this unfairness. So everyone is losing and everyone is stealing. Khair. That was one thing. The other thing they were doing, لا تفسدوا في الأرض بعد إصلاحها, there was widespread robberies and attacking people, attacking caravans. So people were not safe, which is mentioned in detail here. وَلَا تَقْعُدُوا بِكُلِّ صِرَاطٍ تُوعِدُونَ وَتَصُدُّونَ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ مَنْ آمَنَ بِهِ وَتَبْغُونَهَا عِوَجًا. The other thing that they used to do is they used to have a whole propaganda machine taking people away from the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these are some of the things that they were doing. Shu'aib alayhi salam reminded them of the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and warned them as well. And they said, we are going to expel you and whoever believes with you unless you come back to our faith. So of course, Shu'aib alayhi salam and his people refused, and they continued to threaten him and do all of these things, and then the adab of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala descended on them. So what happened with these people? The scream of the angel came, and secondly, adab yawm al-dhulla is mentioned in the Quran, where a cloud came, it covered them like a ceiling, and then instead of rain falling from it, fire started descending from that cloud. So that cloud showered fire upon them and burned them and scorched them. After these stories are mentioned, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions some of the lessons. What are we supposed to learn from them? So, وَلَوْ أَنَّ أَهْلَ الْقُرَىٰ آمَنُوا وَاتَّقَوْا لَفَتَحْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ بَرَكَاتٍ مِّنَ السَّمَاءِ وَالْأَرْضِ. If people in any society, in any part of the world, if they live with iman and taqwa, Allah opens up the barakat, the blessings of the skies and the earth. But they choose to refuse. They start relying more on their own so-called intellect, and they refuse the signs of Allah, the instructions of Allah, the commands of Allah. They want to live the way they want to live, and then the grasp of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes. Allah seizes them. After this, from verse 103 onwards, the story of Musa alayhi salam is mentioned in a great deal of detail. He was sent to Fir'aun. He invited Fir'aun. He told him to release Bani Israel, to stop enslaving them and mistreating them, abusing them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him the sign of the stick turning into the snake, and the sign of the shining hand, where he would put his hand under his arm and he would take it out. It would be shining so bright that it would be almost like a blinding light coming out of his hand. They said, this is magic, so let's gather our own magicians and put together our own magical show. And then of course, as we know, the asa of Musa alayhi salam, the stick of Musa alayhi salam, turned into a real snake, and it devoured everything that those people were showing. When this happened, all of the sorcerers and magicians also accepted Islam. They fell into sujood in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Fir'aun threatened them that I'm going to kill all of you, I'm going to crucify you, I'm going to cut your hands and your legs off. They said, it's okay, you can do whatever you want. Then another campaign was launched against Musa alayhi salam, because by now the deen of Musa alayhi salam started spreading very quickly, and people started getting together, and this movement was seen as a threat by Fir'aun and his leadership. So they continued to try to harm Musa alayhi salam and his people, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continued to show them signs, many signs. At-Tufan, Al-Jarad, Al-Qummal, Al-Dafati', Ad-Dam, Ayatin, Mufassalat. Different types of tribulations befell them, but every time a problem would come, they would go to Musa alayhi salam and say, ask Allah to remove it. Musa alayhi salam would make dua, Allah would remove it. They would start doing the same thing, and then another punishment would come. So storms, for example, Mufassirin mentioned that floodwaters came and destroyed everything, destroyed their crops, destroyed their homes. They went to Musa alayhi salam so that he can make dua to Allah to remove this, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala removed it. But again, they went back to the same thing. Al-Jarad, locusts. Locusts were, thrown upon them, and locusts, they travel in basically huge armies that look like clouds, and once they cover a crop, a field, or a harvest, that's it. They destroy it. They finish it. So these locusts started coming and destroying everything of theirs. Then again, they went to Musa alayhi salam, asked him to make dua. Musa alayhi salam made dua, but they went back to the same thing. Al-Qummal, lice or bedbugs. So these things were in such, it was, to such an extent that it drove them crazy. So it's one thing that, you have a little bit of a problem and it's a little bit of a nuisance, but it's another thing when it becomes an emergency. It's at catastrophic proportions, and that's how these things came. Again, Musa alayhi salam would make dua, the problem would go away, they would come back. Another thing that they were inflicted with was frogs. Frogs started appearing in everything, in every dish, every vessel, every food item. Frogs would start jumping out. It drove them completely crazy. Again, with the dua of Musa alayhi salam, it was fixed, but they went back to the same problems. Ad-Dam, blood. So what used to happen is all of the drinking water that they had turned to blood. When the people of Fir'aun, the Qibt, when they would go to drink the water, it would turn into blood. But if somebody from the nation of Musa alayhi salam would drink from it, it would remain as water. So eventually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saved Bani Israel from Fir'aun altogether. وَجَاوَزْنَا بِبَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ الْبَحْرِ. Here the details of that are not given. Those are mentioned in other surahs. But soon after they crossed that river, what did Bani Israel see? أَتَوْا عَلَى قَوْمٍ يَعْكُفُونَ عَلَى أَصْنَامٍ لَهُمْ. They came across a group of people that were worshipping some idols. So they said to Musa alayhi salam, can we have a statue just like they have statues? Yani, we want to have an interaction with our God so that we can see him. So they asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for a statue. So Musa alayhi salam said, how ignorant you are. After Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has shown you so many signs of his greatness, his might, his power, you want to have a statue like these people have? At one point, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called Musa alayhi salam to the mountain of Tur. And first it was for 30 nights, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had it extended by 10 days. فَتَمَّ مِيقَاتُ رَبِّهِ 40 لَيْلَةً. That time that he spent there for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was a complete 40 days. Musa alayhi salam told his brother Harun alayhi salam to look after things in his absence. So Harun alayhi salam was his na'ib or his Khalifa while he was gone. And he said, just look after them, make sure everything is running in order. And if anyone tries to create trouble, don't follow them, don't listen to them. So Musa alayhi salam came, and he was spending that time in seclusion with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He became very close to Allah, and he said, oh Allah, can you allow me to see you? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, you cannot see me, you will not be able to see me. Instead, look at the mountain. Look at such and such hill, and if that hill can stand in its place, can withstand me, then you'll be able to see me as well. فَلَمَّا تَجَلَّى رَبُّهُ لِلْجَبَلِ Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala descended some of His nur on that mountain. The mountain shattered. And Musa alayhi salam fainted. When he regained consciousness, he said, Subhanak, tubtu ilayk, I make tawbah. Wa ana awwal al-mu'mineen, I am the first of believers. In other words, I believe in you without seeing you. This was just something that came in my heart. So in this world, no one can see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. With these worldly eyes, in this dunya, nobody can see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, Musa alayhi salam was given the Torah and all of those things. But what happened in the meantime, in the background, this man named Samiri had created a golden calf, a calf made out of gold. And he got people to start worshipping this calf. Remember, they were already interested in having some kind of a statue. So he told them, this is your real God. Anyways, Musa alayhi salam came back. He was very upset, very angry. And those people that worship the calf, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, the anger of Allah and disgrace in this worldly life will be with them. Then at one point, Musa alayhi salam chose 70 people to go with him. لِمِيقَاتِنَا, to go and listen to the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to listen to the wahi being revealed. Now they came and they spent that time on the mountain with Musa alayhi salam. When they went back, instead of believing and having refreshed their faith and bringing and refreshing, renewing the faith of the community, they said, we heard a voice, but we're not sure if it was Allah or not. To create more doubts and more suspicions. And that was the time when the mountain of Tur was raised and suspended over their heads, and they were threatened that if they did not believe it, they would be crushed. So, in between, there is mention of the Prophet ﷺ, verses 157 to 158, talk about, in contrast to all of this, the followers of Rasulullah ﷺ. Allah will give this world, فَسَأَكْتُبُهَا لِلَّذِينَ يَتَّقُونَ, my mercy extends beyond everything. In some books of Asbab al-Nuzul, it's mentioned that when Allah said this, رَحْمَتِي وَسِعَتْ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ, my mercy transcends everything. So Iblis spoke out. Allah said, it's vaster than everything. He said, oh Allah, I am also a thing. So will your mercy be will extend beyond me as well? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then revealed, فَسَأَكْتُبُهَا لِلَّذِينَ يَتَّقُونَ, I am going to write down, decree my mercy for those who have fear of me, for those who have taqwa. وَيُؤْتُونَ الزَّكَاةَ, pay zakah. وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ بِآيَاتِنَا يُؤْمِنُونَ, those that believe in our signs. And as far as this ummah is concerned, الَّذِينَ يَتَّبِعُونَ الرَّسُولَ النَّبِيَّ الْأُمِّيَّ الَّذِي يَجِدُونَهُ مَكْتُوبًا عِندَهُمْ فِي التَّوْرَاةِ وَالْإِنْجِيلِ, those that follow this prophet, this unlettered prophet, about whom they find mention in the Torah, in the Injil, and then there's mention of the things that the Prophet ﷺ does for them. Verse 160 speaks about how the tribes of Bani Israel were divided into 12, and that occasion where they asked for water, and Musa alayhi salam struck the stone with his stick, and 12 streams sprouted, and a few other instances about Musa alayhi salam. Then from verse 163 to 166, it's another story. These were also people of Bani Israel, presumably after Musa alayhi salam, and these were the people of Sabt, Ashab al-Sabt. So they used to live on at a village at the edge of the water, and they used to fish for a living, and they were told that they are not supposed to fish on Saturdays. So they thought they were very clever and said, okay, fine, we're not going to technically fish on Saturday, but we'll throw the nets. So they used to throw the nets in the water on Saturday, and they used to make these pits under the water that would trap the fish, and then go and collect them on Sunday and say, well, we didn't fish on Saturday. So they thought that they were going to outsmart the system of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or find a loophole in the system of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So some people from amongst them warned them and said, look, you should not do this. You should not do this. So basically the community was divided into three groups. There were those who were doing this act, those fishermen who were actually going and doing this. And then there were those who were not doing it, but they were quiet. And there was a third group who was not doing it, and they were trying to stop the ones who were doing it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about these people. So they were warning, they were telling them, advising them, don't do this, don't do this. The second group, who was kind of passive, they were not engaging in that act, but they weren't doing anything to stop it either. They said to that first group, why are you advising people that Allah is going to destroy them anyways? These people are write-offs. Why are you spending your time trying to warn them and make them understand? They said two reasons. مَعَذِرَةً إِلَىٰ رَبِّكُمْ وَلَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَّقُونَ. So that we have something to present in front of Allah when we are asked about this on the Day of Judgment. When we are asked, we can say, oh Allah, we tried to stop them, we did tell them. And the second thing is, who knows, maybe these people will listen. But these people, they just neglected those reminders. So the outcome of this was, أَنْجَيْنَا الَّذِينَ يَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ السُّوءِ. Those people who were trying to stop those from doing wrong, these were saved and the rest were destroyed. (171) again gives reference to that occasion when the mountain was uplifted and suspended over them. Verse 172 is very important. It talks about the covenant of Alastu, the promise of Alastu. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gathered all the human beings, all the arwah, the souls of the human beings together, hadith mentioned that in the form of small ants, or in the size of small ants, and وَأَشْهَدَهُمْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ أَلَسْتُ بِرَبِّكُمْ. He made them testify over themselves, bear witness to themselves, am I not your Lord? قَالُوا بَلَىٰ. They said, of course you are our Lord. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, I did this so that on the Day of Judgment you cannot say that we were unaware of this. مَا كُنَّا عَنْ هَذَا غَافِلِينَ. What does this mean? It means that before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent us into this world, through that ahad, through that covenant of Alastu, He has instilled inside the nature of every human being the tendency to always go towards Tawheed. This is the nature of the human being. The objective of that was to put this inside the mind and inside the conscience of a person, that you will always go towards one God. There is one God. So a person is born on this. كُلُّ مَوْلُودٍ يُولَدُ عَلَى الْفِطْرَةِ. Every child is born with this nature, to always gravitate towards one Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So even if a person has nothing else, they have no source of guidance, they have nobody to guide them, they have their own nature, which will, if they allow it, it will inadvertently guide them towards one Allah. After this, there is another story. This is a story of someone either in the time of Musa alayhi salam, or it was someone in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or it could be about both. The one in the time of Musa alayhi salam, his name was Bala'am ibn Ba'ura. And this was a person who had, he was mustajabud du'a. In other words, he had this power of whenever he would raise his hands, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would accept his du'as. Some Mufassirin have mentioned that he knew the Ismul A'zam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the name that when Allah is called upon with that name, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers. When Musa alayhi salam was going to enter into Baytul Maqdis initially, this person's tribe came to him and said that you make dua against Musa alayhi salam. He said, if I do that, my dunya will be ruined and my akhirah will also be ruined. How could I make dua against a prophet of Allah? So people had found him, the people that were lived that had those Amalika, Qawman Jabbareen, those people that had overtaken Bayt al-Maqdis, they found this guy. And they knew he was a special person. So they came to him, said, you make dua. He said, I can't. So they bribed him. And some narrations mention that they enticed him with a woman. He ended up making dua against Musa alayhi salam. The moment he made dua, his tongue came out. His tongue came out of his mouth, hanging out like that of a dog. So the story begins, وَاتْلُ عَلَيْهِمْ, read to them, tell them the story of the one that we had given our signs. So either the Ism al-Azam or the acceptance of dua. فَانْسَلَخَ مِنْهَا, but he slipped out of them. فَاتْبَعَهُ الشَّيْطَانِ, shaitan followed him. فَكَانَ مِنَ الْغَاوِينَ, he went astray. وَلَوْ شِئْنَا لَرَفَعْنَاهُ بِهَا, if we wanted, we could have elevated him through those same signs. وَلَكِنَّهُ أَخْلَدَ إِلَى الْأَرْضِ, but he chose rather to stay close to the earth, to stay close to the world. In other words, the worldly life. He wanted an immediate benefit. وَاتَّبَعَ هَوَاهُ, he followed his desire. فَمَثَلُهُ كَمَثَلِ الْكَلْبِ, his example is like that of a dog. إِن تَحْمِلْ عَلَيْهِ يَلْهَثْ أَوْ تَتْرُكْهُ يَلْهَثْ, whether you go towards it, if you go and attack it, you try to shoo it away, its tongue is going to hang out. You know how dogs, they breathe heavily with their tongues hanging out? That is what yalhath is. And if you leave him alone by himself, he's going to do that. ذَلِكَ مَثَلُ الْقَوْمِ الَّذِينَ كَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِنَا, that is the example of those who have refuted our signs. And others have said that this was revealed about Umayyah ibn Abi Salt. So this was a person who was very knowledgeable, very intelligent, and he was prepared to accept Islam. He had all of the understanding, but he, instead of submitting to Allah and His Rasul ﷺ, he started becoming jealous of the Prophet ﷺ, jealous of his influence, and he started creating trouble for the Prophet ﷺ. Some say that this verse was revealed about him. The rest of the surah is devoted to some themes of akhirah, reminders of the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Always remembering to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for his bounties, such as the bounties of children. Sometimes people, they turn towards Allah and they ask Allah for a child, then Allah gives them a child, and then they turn away, they completely forget about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They got what they wanted, therefore now the deal with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is over. خُذِ الْعَفْوَ وَأْمُرْ بِالْعُرْفِ وَأَعْرِضْ عَنِ الْجَاهِلِينَ, hold on to forgiveness. خُذِ الْعَفْوَ, hold on to forgiveness. In other words, this is something that you're going to need a lot of because of the way you will be treated. So hold on to forgiveness, keep it close to you. وَأْمُرْ بِالْعُرْفِ, and continue to instruct people to do good. وَأَعْرِضْ عَنِ الْجَاهِلِينَ, and keep turning away from the ignorant people. And in this manner, the surah comes to a close. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enable us to take guidance from this surah and practice upon it. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun, wa salamun ala al-mursaleen, walhamdulillahi.